This is every LEGO Minecraft animal, and in this video, I'm going to be making a zoo to house them all. Each animal will have their own enclosure based on the 12 biomes they're found in. But first, I'm going to build the zoo layout with enough room for exhibits as well as pathways for the visitors. And each biome will be placed on a 16 by 16 stud base plate to keep things simple. Let's get building. For the first exhibit, I'm going to build the Cherry Grove biome. This biome is still new to the game, but it's already one of my favorites. The pink leaves are calming and the scenery is so peaceful, even though it's pretty much just a reskin of a plains biome. This build is really basic. It just features a small pond, pitcher plant, dirt blocks with some gradual elevation, and of course, a cherry blossom tree. I decided to place sniffers in this biome, even though it doesn't technically spawn here. The biome and the sniffer came out in the same update, so I figured it makes sense to place it here. I also added a bee as they're commonly found here as well, which knocks 2 animals off the list. I think this is a great starting point for the zoo. I do think I could have done a little bit better on the cherry blossom tree. I would have liked to use a different shade of brown for the tree trunk and maybe include some green studs in the leaves. But let's go ahead and place our first exhibit. The plains biome is probably the most iconic in the game, but it's really basic. I decided since most of the animals that spawn here are commonly found on a farm, it would be a good chance to pay respects to my first LEGO Minecraft set, the Red Barn. I used a combination of red and white blocks to raise the barn like the Amish, then placed some dark gray for the roof. I placed a water trough for the livestock to drink from, and I jam-packed as many animals as I could because there are a lot to go through. These included the cow, chicken, sheep, and pig. And that's 4 more down. I'm really happy with how this came out. I think the red barn is going to be a nice touch when added to the zoo. Now onto the desert biome. The desert is covered with sand with almost no life to be found. For this build, I included some dead bushes as well as a few cacti to add a little bit of color. I also added my own take on a desert well to give it some scenery. Ended up only adding a camel and a rabbit to this biome, which takes 2 more animals off the list. I'm really happy with how this build came out, even though the animals kind of blends in with the sand. Oh well, let's go ahead and add it to the zoo. The next biome is another fan favorite, the Lush Cave. This biome has a lot more life to it. There's moss, vines, water, drip leaves, and of course, axolotls. I used a lot of light gray to represent clay blocks throughout this build. I made sure to include a lot of height so I'd have plenty of space to hang things like glowberries and spore blossoms. I added some azalea bushes and some water flowing in from above. I used this sideways building technique that allowed me to place the berries and the blossoms on the roof of the cave. I also placed a bat there too. I populated the pools with 3 cute little axolotls and my least favorite animal in the game, the glow squid. I detest that thing. Anyways, that's 3 more animals down. I absolutely love the depth I have on this build. I think the only thing I messed up on is I forgot to add any dark gray for stone. But I don't think anybody cares, so let's go ahead and add it in. Next up is the savanna. The savanna biome is a relatively flat biome filled with tall grass and the occasional pumpkin patch. For this build, I decided to combine 2 biomes into one by placing a beach. This is mostly because I did not have enough of those olive green tiles to cover the entire plate. In the beach, I included some sugarcane and sand, while on land, I planted some grass and pumpkins. I used dark gray bricks for the trunk of the acacia tree and dark green for the leaves. This is typically the color palette LEGO uses for their official sets, so I went ahead and did it too. For the animals, I started with the turtle on the beach and included a horse, donkey, and llama on land. But there was one more animal I desperately needed, the coveted armadillo. This set just came out earlier this year and it took me a few days to track it down, but I finally found it at a Barnes & Noble of all places. They had them. I ripped out the cute little armadillos and I really hope they enjoy their new home. And this takes 5 more animals off the list. By the way, I didn't include the mule, and that's for 2 reasons. LEGO has never made an official mule, and technically, they don't spawn naturally. To make a mule, you need to breed a horse and a donkey, and since we have both of those, we're just gonna count the mule too. And now we can place the savanna in the zoo. The bamboo jungle is full of, well, bamboo. There's also plenty of grass and tall jungle trees covered in vines. For this build, I decided to use a brighter color of green for the grass blocks. I also provided a large pond for the animals to drink from. I populated the terrain with tall and short grass, and of course, bamboo. For the bamboo, I used a technique I borrowed from Cheesy Studios. Then I included a small jungle tree that uses some profile bricks to make it stand out a little bit. I used some lime green studs to give it a little bit of variation in the leaves. And lastly, I added some vines using one of my favorite pieces, the green L. I also wanted to include one more piece of decoration for the exhibit. I used a few masonry bricks just to represent a jungle temple since I really couldn't figure out how to fit one in here. And finally, it's time to add the animals. I of course had to start with the pandas, which I got in the giant panda set. The young one is drinking from the water while the large one is chowing down on some bamboo. Next, I added an ocelot, which is, I guess, a large cat or something. And finally, I added the rare parrot figure. Seriously, this parrot figure has only come out in one set back in 2019. But the good news is a new set is coming out in March, which will include 4 of them. Anyways, that marks 3 more animals off the list. I think this one turned out great. I probably could have included a larger tree, but I think that would have been too much. And now let's go ahead and add it to the zoo. The snowy slopes, a terrain filled with a whole lot of nothing. I decided to challenge myself by making this the tallest exhibit in the zoo, since it is based in the mountains after all. I used a combination of dirt and stone and snowy blocks for this build. I even included a cave to shelter the animals. I also placed some emerald ore towards a peak to give it a little bit more color, and the final mountain ended up only being about 11 blocks high, but it still was the tallest in my entire zoo. And I was now able to finally add the animals, which is pretty much just the goat. When I originally built this exhibit, I had planned to include the polar bears. However, I found out later that the polar bears only spawn here in Bedrock Edition, and who even plays that? So just the goat it is. This build isn't the best in terms of variation or technique, but it's very tall, and so am I. This marks the 7th exhibit in our zoo. Sticking with the cold theme, this next biome is the beautiful ice spikes. This biome is one of the strangest ones in the overworld, but I think it's so pretty. Now this biome ended up being a little bit more complicated than I thought due to the lack of the medium blue pieces I had. Actually, when building this, I realized that there's like way too many shades of blue in LEGO's color palette. There's aqua, bright blue. Anyways, I used some light trans blue plates to represent the water, and light blue to represent the ice. I kept it simple with snowy covered stone and dirt blocks for the base, and I did what I could with the medium blue pieces to make a decent sized ice spike. I had enough just for a small one on the side too. And finally we can add in the polar bears for one more animal off the list. I think the height of a larger ice spike really saves this build, otherwise it would look rather bare. Get it? Anyways, let's go ahead and put it in our zoo. And now it's time to build our final cold biome, the Snowy Taiga. The Snowy Taiga is a winter wonderland full of Christmas trees and furry critters. I included a river in the front of the build, then filled it with snow-covered dirt blocks. I planted some short grass and placed a spruce tree. I used dark green to represent the leaves and covered some of them with snow. I placed a fox and a few wolves in this biome.
My name's Todd. Mine's Copper. I'm a hound dog.
Which knocks another 2 off our list. I like how this one came out. I think it could have been done better with the placement of the snow. I also think the river is a little too large and takes away from the scenery, but oh well, I don't think the guests will mind. The mangrove swamp is one of my favorite biomes. There's mud, vines, frogs, and witches all over the place. I covered the base with trans blue tiles since most of the biome is technically underwater. Then I placed some mud blocks and mangrove roots. I also had to include some lily pads. For the mangrove tree itself, I used brown bricks to make a large root system, then I plopped on a large amount of green leaves. I also added vines similar to the ones in the jungle biome. For the animals, I included tadpoles, a few frogs, and a lucky black cat since you can find them at witches' huts. And that'll take 3 more off the list. I think I really nailed it with this build. If I could change anything about it, I would use dark brown for the roots and maybe dark green for the leaves. But otherwise, I think it's ready to be added to our zoo. The warm ocean biome probably has the most biodiversity in the game. There's so many plants and animals that spawn here, like the coral, seagrass, and everybody's favorite, the sea pickle. For this build, I simply covered a plate with tan tiles with a little elevation in the center. I made a couple builds for tube, horn, and fire coral. I added in extra detail for the fire coral since it was pretty much the centerpiece of this build. I then placed kelp, seagrass, and a pair of sea pickles. Now for the animals, this biome has salmon, pufferfish, cod, tropical fish, a squid, and a dolphin, which is the most animals in a single exhibit. And that's not including coral and sea pickles, which are technically animals too. And this takes 6 animals off the list, leaving only 1 more left. I really like how this one turned out. The color of the corals are really eye-catching, and I think I made a nice home for these fishies. Now, I probably should have put some glass around to protect the guests and the fish, but oh well. And for our final biome, we have the fan favorite, the mushroom fields. This biome is totally weird and unique with a bunch of fungus among us. I decided to make this build into an island and place mycelium blocks in a circular pattern surrounded by water. I wanted to use a cool purple color for the tile, but I only had dark gray, so we're gonna have to deal with it. I placed a huge brown mushroom, which is pretty simple enough, and then I included a huge red mushroom, which I spent way too much time on, but I'm very happy with how it looks. For the animals in this build, you guessed it, I tossed in some mushrooms, which are pretty much cows covered in fungus. Gross. This is the last animal on the list, which is really satisfying. This build isn't much to look at, but I think the huge mushroom structures really saves it. And I'm happy my mushrooms have a new home. Now that we've placed our last exhibit, we can open our zoo for the guests. Which means the zoo is open for business. I made sure to cover the zoo in jumper tiles so I can place figures. The zoo is full of life and what I assume are happy animals. Also, by the way, I know I left out some animals like the spider or the ravager, and that's because I decided that I didn't really want to include the hostile mobs, as I really wanted to focus on the peaceful animals in the overworld. But let me know if you want to see a hostile mob zoo in the future. Anyways, thanks for watching.